Okay, welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the new people that are joining us today. I hope you got to watch the video that was posted for last week. The first, where is Bucklin Brook? We're at part 2. This is the section that I dread the most because, you know, when it comes to the destruction of Bucklin Brook, this is the epicenter. This is ground zero. This is where it all began. But there'll be more on that later. I'm going to turn it over to Don, who's going to just give an overview of where we are now and how we got here.
Well, good morning. Last week during session 1 of Where's Bucklin Brook, we introduced the upper portion of Bucklin Brook, the headwater, the beginning of the flow of the brook through the across the industrial highway above us here by the Stop and Shop, and down across Royal Square, where one of the Bucklin family members had a house, and then through Oak Grove Cemetery and the related cemetery next to it, beyond across Armistice Boulevard. And there isn't much of a drop, as much as we can figure. It's a flowing brook coming from the headwater of Sweden Swamp in South Attleboro. And I discovered in a reading, only yesterday, I was reviewing the Bucklin family material online, trying to bone up for this. And I saw a mention that Bucklin Brook originated in a cedar swamp. That would make it probably, in keeping with our area, a white cedar swamp. So that was a revelation to me. We do still have white cedar swamps toward Acushnet and New Bedford and Bridgewaters, but they're very delicate, and any change in water pH can kill a white cedar swamp. So clearly, the ravages of time have influenced Sweden Swamp here in South Attleboro, in that I don't think you can find a white cedar there now today. So the whole environment of Sweden Swamp has changed over the years. Getting back to where we are, session 2 of Where's Bucklin Brook. Today, we're in the McCoy Stadium area, and we're going to pick up our session here. And as I speak to you, I'm looking at a banking out north of me, and we begin to sense or get a feel that here on the original Rehoboth Plain, what in modern times they refer to as the Darlington Plain, we're starting to get a sudden drop in the landscape. And as we're down in the McCoy Stadium complex, we're starting to feel like we're in a lower environment. And in fact, we are. If you go up on the street and look back at this, we're in a hole. We're in a depression in the landscape. And in the middle of this depression, here we sit. And there sits behind me McCoy Stadium. And that's a story in of itself, going back to the time of World War II, when it was constructed. Just prior to World War II and during the war years of World War II, McCoy Stadium was constructed. But let's leave that for now, and let's go back further, and let's look at the landscape around us, and let's talk about what we refer to as the Rehoboth Plain or Darlington Plain. It's a glacial outwash plain that if you go out onto Newport Avenue in this direction, you'll notice a real flatness when you go down Newport Avenue toward Rumford. That flatness. Well, that's not uncommon around here in different places. That's a glacial outwash plain. And that's what we're on here. primarily in the Bucklin Brook watershed, is a glacial outwash plain. Where the western bound is the upper reaches to my left that would overlook the Pawtucket River and the end of the Blackstone River off in this direction. And just over Quality Hill, this ridge, this glacial ridge over in this direction, down below, if you go to the top of that ridge, the thing you'll see is Pawtucket and what? Historically Slater Mill, the birthplace of the American Revolution. So here we are in little filled in Bucklin Brook, and we're a sister watershed to the big Blackstone, which is just over the ridge. And just beyond us is the beginning of the American Industrial Revolution, this close. So we're in essence, we're a part of it. We're breathing the air here. To the north, we know, is Sweden Swamp bound, South Attleboro. To our east is, further over, is the 10-mile river coming north to south. And to our south, behind me, is Rumford, or early Rehoboth, the original center of Rehoboth. The early settling of Rehoboth was right behind us, a few miles down. So within this bound, primarily, half of it is probably 7 or 8 square miles of Bucklin Brook watershed, which we're in right now. Jumping over Newport Avenue in this direction, we have a portion of the sister watershed, the southern end, 10-mile river watershed. And you may not see it officially in modern terms, but from what we've been able to figure from our research less than a year, is that Bucklin Brook and the southern end of the 10-mile river watershed are twin, they're co-related, there are similarities. Origins of water from Sweden Swamp to the 10-mile river, origins from Sweden Swamp of water to Bucklin Brook. A common flow southward, a common outlet into Narragansett Bay, one above the other, not too distant. In the southern bound of the Bucklin family that held this property for, I figure about 5 or 6 generations, somewhere in here. The original was about 600 acres. William Bucklin. He was the first to settle in here, of the Bucklin family. Not the first person, because there was a man named John Hazel, and there was another man, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name. They tried to settle this original tract of Bucklin Brook watershed, but got into politics and had to assimilate into the Rehoboth settlement because they had not asked permission to settle here, and they were a rub between the Plymouth colony, which held this property. Believe it or not, the elders of the Plymouth colony in Plymouth, Massachusetts, 1620, Plymouth Rock, held this land over here as part of their domain. They had dominion over this. And they were battling for that dominion with the Puritans in Boston and other entities to the south, even Connecticut, and the Bucklin family. They settled, William Bucklin came in, settled, and why he was not molested and asked to leave, I don't quite understand, but when Newman took his people down from Weymouth to settle Rehoboth, Rumford, the permanent settlement, he was smart. He got permission from the Plymouth elders to settle here. He had permission. So that's how the Rehoboth settlement came and became a permanent settlement. They were investors, and they invested in land holdings that went out as a spoke, and that is called the Ring of the Green. today down there in Rumford. But getting back in here into Bucklin Brook, William Bucklin settled the original tract in here, 600 acres. He found himself, or that Bucklin family, found themselves neighbors to another homestead across Newport Avenue in what today is Slater Park, but it was the Daggett family. And the Daggett family is prominent along Narragansett Bay, all the way from a Daggett ferry on the Seekonk River to up through the 10-mile watershed up north. You'll find Daggetts. You'll find Daggetts in Attleboro. So they spread out over the landscape. The Bucklin family spread out over the landscape. And the Bucklin family eventually spread across America. There are Bucklins today in California making wine. There were Bucklins who settled the original Providence. There were Bucklins who were mercantiles in Providence, into shipping, like the Brown brothers. And there was a Bucklin who supposedly fired the first shot of the American Revolution on what? The Gaspee. The British revenue ship Gaspee, the Gaspee days, down the bay here. So it was a Bucklin involved in that. And it was Bucklins who settled westward New England, Adams, Mass, Cheshire, Mass. Some of them went up into Vermont. But this is where they originally began, right here, the ground we stand on. And they are the early history of Bucklin Brook. They created little mill ponds to grind their grain, to cut their wood. There isn't much water power here. It's a modest supply of water, but they had just enough water in that brook to make the little ponds, to generate the water power, to grind their grain, cut their lumber, make their homes, construct their homesteads. And as the family progressed, some of this original Bucklin holding was divided up amongst the family. The same thing happened across the way to their neighbors, the Daggetts. I believe there were 7 generations of Daggetts holding what is Slater Park today, up to the 1870s. I think the Bucklin influence here ceased probably earlier than that. Famous personages came down through here. Roger Williams, when he went to England, went to Parliament, he addressed Parliament. He left Rhode Island, went to England, addressed Parliament. He came back down through Newport Avenue here, holding the first Rhode Island charter. History was made through here. He didn't have safe passage in Boston when he came back from England. So he was smart. He got a writ of safe passage from Parliament in England to allow him to land in Boston and come through Boston unmolested, so that he could walk down the Newport Road and cross over and go back to Providence with the first Rhode Island charter in his hand. Leading to the American Revolution, General Washington made a note in his diary. He stopped in what is Slater Park today and refreshed and stayed with the Daggetts. So they make jokes about it, but we really have a diary entry of Washington here on the Rehoboth Plain, the Darlington Plain, here, related to where we are today. So, as time went on, as history went on, and Pawtucket developed, and the center of Providence, greater Providence developed, that was really something very interesting, but we can't get into that. This area out here that we're on kind of remained an outlier. We're on really what is a eastern prairie, this sand plain. There were prairie type plants out here. It was a grassland. Part of this was a grassland. And during the King Philip War, when they were pursuing Philip, he made a hurried crossing of this grassland and exposed the fact that he was here, put himself at great risk, and then he crossed this sand plain and was gone. And they were in hot pursuit of him. But this grassland in the 1800s was just a place where people came to hunt and fish. There wasn't much settlement out here. But what happened in history? In the early 1800s, guys seriously started fooling around with steam power and steam engines. The first recorded steam experiment goes back to the 1st century AD. And ever since that time, people have been trying and messing with steam to see what they could invent from steam. And it wasn't until the early 1800s that they finally could get a steam engine running that would pump water from a mine or turn a piece of machinery to make an engine. And that steam power, after the water power of the Blackstone River, coupled with the water power of the Blackstone River and other rivers and watersheds, and with Slater's mill here, his experiment, the Industrial Revolution, and that steam engine is what helped create industrial revolutions across the world, Britain, Europe, here. And that steam engine is what brought development to the Rehoboth Plain. It brought the railroad here, a very easy place to lay down railroad tracks because of its flatness and its sandy makeup. You get a train in here on rails, what can you do? You can make a truck or a car, and you can haul in supplies of coal. And with supplies of coal, you stack it. And what do you do with it next to a stacked supply of coal? You build a factory. You can build a stationary factory because you have the power source there. You have the coal, and you have the ability to create steam to drive the power, make the power. So what happened is this Rehoboth Plain, like many other places, built manufacturing places. They laid out a system of railroad tracks. That system of railroad tracks still exists here on the Rehoboth Plain. And you can see that coming right down through the corridor between India Point, Phillipsdale, Rehoboth Plain, Pawtucket, Blackstone corridor, all the way up to Worcester and beyond. So this became part of our Industrial Revolution, and it became a place to settle and urbanize, and that started the population growth of what we see around us today. McCoy Stadium was built in a pond, a wetland, that was part of Bucklin Brook. Hammond Pond, am I correct, Dan?
Yes.
McCoy Stadium sits on Hammond Pond, and eventually the brook was used by the industry above us to dump crazy things into the water, to flush, like they did with all rivers around us. And thus, the story of the blue mud in the pond. A guy that we have coffee and tea with told us, he said, when I was a kid, we played in that pond, and we came out of there, our legs were blue. So we called it the Blue Pond. He's telling us a story at tea one day. And of course, you don't have to imagine very much that somebody was dumping something up here, and it was coming down here into Hammond Pond. Well, the politicians got the idea, because this became polluted and fouled. Well, let's do something with it. And Mayor McCoy of Pawtucket decided, well, let's build a stadium there. So the account that we read in the old newspaper accounts that we read from newspapers was that this was a very muddy place, like a quicksand. And in order to get the footing to build a stadium, they dumped truckload after truckload after truckload of cement down in here to try and solidify the underpinnings to build a stadium. It was kind of a joke when you think about it, but that's what they did. There are who knows how many tons of cement under this stadium, and it developed an urban myth over the years that McCoy Stadium was sinking. Always McCoy Stadium sinking. Well, it was the urban myth because they built it on the mud, and what we joke about now, the blue mud. So that's about it. And then below McCoy Stadium, the brook was filled in just like the brook is above us. And the brook has been filled in and culverted south of us. And we'll learn more about that on session 3 next week. But this is part of the degradation of Bucklin Brook. And I'll kind of end now and be quiet. I'm sure there'll be other things that come to mind, but I'll turn it back to Ben. And you can continue on now with your part, and you can go to your walk part of this.
I'm just going to add a little bit more before we start moving. I know everybody's cold, but it's only September, guys. So, first of all, I do have to mention one of the people that really helped us out with the research, and I don't want to embarrass anybody, but he is here today, Tim from the Pawtucket Library, right over there. Thank you so much, Tim. He was kind of a behind-the-scenes guy. He provided, and he's still providing, a whole bunch of information on this, even now, sending over maps and documents from the Pawtucket Library. That is the main source of all of our research. Now, just to add on to Hammond Pond in the stadium, it's very easy to see the footprint of the pond. It remains today as we walk around, as you look around this low area. And I remember as a kid playing soccer, this used to be soccer fields and ball fields. And I remember it filling with water all the time. There were always puddles here, always. Because naturally, this is a wet area. It's a brook, so that's what nature intended. The water keeps coming down here. It was 1940, as Don said, they put in this stadium here because this was going to really help out the city of Pawtucket. The only thing in their way was Hammond Pond and Bucklin Brook. But the baseball stadium was going to save the city. And, you know, that was just this ridiculous belief that they had 80 years ago. We would never buy that today. Oh, wait a minute, never mind. Forget that part. But they were building this up all around industry up there, houses, all these developments, really building up this part of the city. And it's just funny, 80 years later, the stadium has now failed us, and they no longer want to be here, the new owners of the team. I know it's a touchy subject here in Pawtucket, but they're taking off. And one of the funny things that I laugh about is that one of the reasons they really didn't like McCoy Stadium is because of the way they built up this city around here. And it was no longer suitable to have a stadium here. And it's just kind of funny if you think about it. Don't throw stuff at me because I know we all have good memories of McCoy Stadium. I have several. Been coming here for years, and it's going to be sad to see it go. It's just funny though that all these plans that we have, they only last for so long, and now the brook is gone. So as they look to redevelop this, you know, we exist to be the voice of the 10 Mile River and the voice of Bucklin Brook. And we need to make sure that we're here to remind them that there is still a brook flowing beneath our feet here.
I chuckled the other day. I read an account that if they're going to redevelop this, they have to do test borings to see what's down below. And I chuckled. I said, "You're going to hit concrete," because of the story I had read about them dumping all the concrete in here. But that's an aside. That's kind of being sarcastic, but I chuckled when I read it.
You have to, because shame on the city of Pawtucket for what they did here. It was a crime against nature and a crime against all of us to just decide that this was going to go away. And there's newspaper articles shared by Tim in the 1940. This was a big deal. This Bucklin project was a big deal. They were excited about this. They had men working around the clock to make this brook disappear, make this water disappear. As I said, we're in ground zero of the destruction of Bucklin Brook. So the pond, which was muddy at the time, which, by the way, I read before that, going back even further, Hammond Pond was used as the original water source. Well, not the original, but an early water source for the city of Pawtucket. So they actually drew their water from this pond before it became too polluted, and then at some point they switched to Abbott Run in Cumberland, which flows into the Blackstone. All right, so to get rid of the pond, people have asked me, because they see old pictures, how did they get rid of such a big pond? Very simply, all they had to do was remove the dam, because this was an impoundment. It was created by a dam for water storage. The dam would have been down at the south end somewhere. I don't know if it was across the street in the mobile home park or if it was on this side of the street, but they would remove the dam, the pond would drain, and then you would just have the little course of the brook. And they worked around the clock to put that into the sewer system. They called it the Bucklin Project 80 years ago. It was a big deal. This stadium was common, this development was common. This is, you know, this is what they look forward to, all of this industry, all of these tenement houses. And they got it done ahead of time. And we are going to follow the line again today. And there is a place where, if you look, you can see it flowing beneath our feet. So that's basically where I am now.
You've got a water feature over here you wanted to mention?
Yeah,
you walk over the walk there, or?
Well, it's not even a huge water feature, but along this edge over here, it's just a little outline of flowing water. So when it rains, it will come down, it will create a temporary brook. And it's just nature trying to get back to where it was. This is a brook. This is what it's supposed to be. The water will pool up here. The water will flow here. It's not supposed to be dry land where we're standing right now. So this is probably where we're going to be walking. This is probably wetland with the brook flowing through. Now, those of you that were here last week, remember what I said about the sewers? And that information, you know, that was something I was discussing with Tim. The double sewers, well, here we actually have the triple sewers. And this, without a doubt, right here is the crossing of Bucklin Brook. So Bucklin Brook is right here, flowing in. Straight line, just like when we were at Oak Grove, flows right through.
So they had to do that to take care of the excess water that builds up here when it rains, or?
No, one of them is actually the brook. Okay. The others are actually the catch basins.
Oh, all right.
That flow into the brook. There is actually a brook in our feet, flowing through a culvert. And we're going to see a little bit more of it. All right. So here, if you're not afraid of the cat, these people here, they live right on the brook. They probably don't even know it. But if you're not afraid of manholes and you look through this hole here, you can actually see the brook flowing, and it's down there. You might have to reposition yourself, but you can see the flow in water. Water, mix it with the brook water there. The answer is no. That is completely Bucklin Brook right there. There is no sewage. They don't mix sewage in there. Although, wait till the third walk. I do have something to show you. But the reason why it smells like that is it's underground. It's an old. It might not even necessarily be the water that you're smelling. It could just be the whole system down there.
Yeah.
You know. One of the things I'm thinking about is these culverts are 80 years old. So they put this down here 80 years ago. Most people don't even know it's there. Don't they require some kind of maintenance? Aren't they going to fail at some point? You know, what's going to happen when they do? And also, this brook carries a lot of flood water, which we'll talk about a little bit more next week. It paved over the 8 square mile watershed. Every time there's a heavy rain, it has no choice but to rush down that brook. And if you go to the outflow that you'll see next week, it's a flash flood. Every single time there's a heavy rain, most watersheds act a different way. Like, you know, we take care of the 10 mile of Bucklin Brook watershed. So thinking of the 10 mile river watershed, We have wetlands that go all the way along it. As you go up from Pawtucket, Attleboro, North Attleboro, there's these wetlands, and they're floodplains. They act as a sponge. So when it rains, a lot of rain comes, the water comes down, it goes into these wetlands, and it's held there. And then it slowly releases. It's the nature of a river or a brook. It's really amazing. It will release slowly, and it will save the area downstream from giant floods for the most part. Bucklin Brook doesn't have those floodplains anymore. So the water has no choice but to race down that culvert and spew out at the mouth and race into Narragansett Bay. So when you build on floodplains, you know, you think of the Tuxet River down in Warwick. You build on those floodplains. They have the malls, they have all that pavement that go right to the river, and then people say, what is the state, what is the city, what are you going to do about these floods? The answer is nothing. There's nothing you can do about the floods. It's just nature. The water comes, the water has to go somewhere. You destroy floodplains, you have floods. You build on a floodplain, you're going to flood. It's simple as that. There's no getting around it. They tried to get rid of a brook. The brook is still there flowing, as half of you just saw. You really can't get rid of it. It's going to stay there. That's flowing water here. It's the way it is. Is the original course of the brook. A map provided by Tim clearly shows that. That was probably one of the best things that I saw about it, because that was so clear. It was clear as day. We knew that the brook came in here somewhere. I didn't know that was actually the exact course of it. Over here, it runs out to these mills. That's all private property back there. I'm not saying you should, but if you happen to drive off Rhode Island Avenue down Dunno Lane, the road goes in both directions. Just to the left is a really nice grate, and you can clearly see the brook flowing under there. And to the right there's another one, much more clearly there. I can't take you there because it's private property, and they don't want you there. So I'm just saying, if you happen to go.
What's the name of the lane?
Dunno.
Dunno?
And the left right is second called East Tunnel Lane.
Yes, it is. Yep.
So you can argue it's a public road if you want.
Yeah, because you're not going to get arrested. I'm just not going to take a group of you.
Yeah.
So if you look at old maps, it looks like there were dams and mill ponds from this point. Below Hammond Pond, probably came through this natural wetland, and then over here, opened up to a little mill pond, dropped over a dam. There were a couple between here and its outfall into Narragansett Bay. So this is Adelaide Drive. I never knew this. I never even noticed that.
The other side is
This
all
is
kind
a
of
paper
rusty.
road. Now, this beautiful property here is an open space associated with Bucklin Brook. And there's a lot of stuff here because they've been putting stuff in here for a real long time. I came walking through over the summer, and a lot of old bottles, car parts. There's a lot of stuff in here. But that was interesting to learn that they tried to. You said they tried to develop this, Tim?
In the 80s, yeah.
In the 80s, and something stopped them. Wonder what that is. We can only speculate. Maybe Don has a theory on that. Let's see. That could have been anything.
The
That
old
could have
guy that used to
been.
live next door to me said that a limo showed up, somebody got out, and the trucks left the next day.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
So
That's interesting.
that's when the theory that they found something they forgot they buried came from.
So Don, Tim just shared a really interesting story that happened in the 80s.
Well, we're in, Nancy and I go to Seven Stars in Rumford for tea. And we have a guy that we bump into over there. He told me the story about the blue mud over there at McCoy Stadium.
Dye works.
But somewhere he lived up above, high above here. And I think it's this neighborhood over here. And he said, you know, when I was a kid, the guys, he says, the neighbors, if they had an old car or if they had any kind of junk, he said, they'd bring it down the end of the street and push it off the edge. And he said, down into a hole. He says, then in the early 1950s, when we had the hurricanes, 54, 55, I was a kid. He said the city had junk that blew in a hurricane, and they needed a place to dump it. He says they took it down to that hole, and he said they dumped it in that hole. Well, anyway, this hole was a dumping area, and it was very, very unstable. He said you wouldn't want to walk in there. So I don't know. I'm guessing this may be, this might be part of it. I don't know. He said there's Model A's, Model T's in there. He said you name it, they pushed it in there. So I don't know if he was embellishing the story or if I was
We've
getting.
heard that story.
No, there's a Model T buried in my backyard according to my grandpa.
Well,
Tim just told the story because he's always lived on this. And through here, when I walk through at the other end is what I call Bucklin Meadow. There is a little meadow over there, but I'm not going to take people over this. But Tim just told the story that in the 80s, they have a sign here, Adelaide Drive. They came to develop this. They started, he said, and then the next day, all the trucks just left and they
they had
abandoned
to
it.
stop. It's full of junk. And trying to think of something else. Well, Matt told you there's a little industrial park over that fence.
Yeah.
There's a barrel company and there's an old mill. You'd have to drive there yourself on your own.
Yeah.
But drive in off of, I've done it, off of Prospect Street. I think it's Prospect. Dunnell
Yeah, Rhode Island Ave.
Dunnell Street. It's Dunnell Park, was Dunnell Pond, Dunnell Street. Go to the end, there's a little industrial place. It's kind of old, but that's the other end of this. That's where the brook went right through that little industrial park and came out down below at Hacksaw Field, which we'll visit next week. That'll be part of session 3 next week. But I'm kind of wandering here and digressing, but this guy told me that there was a mill site. He said they had a big tank with water in it. And one time they had a tragedy. A young kid had gotten in and they had a drowning in that tank. So I don't know how it is related to this, where we are here, but this kind of fits into the story he was telling me for what it is. So, you know, where's Bucklin Brook? It's the poor little brook has really had a tough time of it, and
In a tough 80 years.
if anything, the brooks, and I said it last week, if anything, the brook serves as a teaching tool for folks who are environmentally minded to see what can happen when you don't really care about the environment and you let things go. This is what can happen. And with a lot of natural things that we've preserved, this could have been the story. So this is the extreme end. This is what you don't want to allow yourself to get to, allow this to happen. You can see this is a waste area. It's full of invasive plants as I look around. The tree of heaven, the Norway maple. I consider catalpa invasive because everywhere you look, you see catalpa, the bean tree. It's not on a list, but I personally consider catalpa as an invasive Japanese knotweed. I'm
Oh, yes, I see that.
looking at it right here. So this is a classic teaching tool of where you don't want your environment to go. That's it.
Obviously cleared out recently. Tim sent me a message a couple months ago, a month or two ago, saying that the bulldozers came through. And when I inquired about it, first thing I noticed is that there's people that are very surprised there's anybody looking after this area. And I always explained, we were the 10-mile river group and we've expanded to Bucklin Brook too. Nobody knows why it was cleared. Nobody knows who cleared it. A lot of mystery surrounding Bucklin Brook that we don't have it with the 10 mile. We want answers on the 10 mile. We ask and we get the answers. Bucklin Brook is very, very mysterious.
There's another aspect of this little watershed. Some of you may not know that I've done archaeological work in the general area related to prehistoric activities in our general area. I have a little bit of knowledge. I'm not trained in the field, but I've rubbed elbows with professionals, knowledgeable people, and this is another aspect of Bucklin Brook that I would love to see happen someday. The discovery in some place here in Bucklin Brook area of prehistoric remains. I know of no, I'm sure there are, but I know of no artifacts associated with Bucklin Brook. But you know that the native people were here. If there was water, there was wildlife, they were here. We know they were in the 10 mile further to the east. I've personally seen evidence of it. This is what we'd like to see someday here in Bucklin Brook. Actually, the discovery of some kind of remain or evidence. I'm not talking human remains. That's another subject. I'm talking stone tools, things like that. It's here. It's here, but this whole landscape has been pretty well knocked around. But somewhere the prehistory is still here. Someday, somehow, we'll find it and link it to this little watershed here. So that's just another.
The falls of the Blackstone River to the Bucklin Brook would have been their
eastern bound.
Or close to.
Yeah.
And then we switch over to the Daggett area, which probably would have been pretty wild between Bucklin Brook and the cleared Daggett area. One note to make is that there's another brook very similar to Bucklin Brook that we refer to as Daggett Brook, which comes out in Slater Park and is well preserved. We feel that that's actually, it comes out of a culvert by the neighborhood that I live in. And we think that that's more buried brook over there. But the old text that refers to Bucklin Brook refers to it as a free-flowing and clean stream. So Bucklin Brook was probably a very beautiful brook. And it was very, very important in the early history of Pawtucket, which, is the city that a lot of us live in. Well, we live close to, Pawtucket and Attleboro, they go hand in hand. We share waterways. We share two waterways.
Think about this in the 1600s. There were very few people here. Bucklin's, Daggett's, Newman settlement, Woodcock Garrison in North Attleboro, up at the north end of North Attleboro, and William Blackstone, Study Hill, Lonsdale, Cumberland, and maybe a few other people. That's it. Between Rumford and North Attleboro at the Plainville line, they were the only European people here. The rest of the people on the landscape were native people. And they had, at that time, they had been decimated by a plague, by diseases. Much like we're concerned about COVID today, they got the diseases of the day that the Europeans had brought. And the poor Wampanoag people on this side of the Blackstone River, at that time where their population was way down, whole villages, whole native villages had succumbed. Every person in the village, they'd walk into native settlements and not find a person alive. This is down in the Plymouth area. So there was a lot of stuff going on here in the 1600s. How things have changed is just amazing. my mind wanders with this stuff. I read things.
That's the whole point.
This was a wilderness at one time, a virtual wilderness. I mean, we had bears here, we had wolves here, we had, there would have been beaver dams, natural beaver dams on Bucklin Brook at one time. That was all here. We had mountain lions, you name all those things that you think of existing out west or other places. That was here. And even further back toward the last glacier, we had herds of caribou roaming through here. Caribou, think about it. But the environment changes and those things go away, and we change the environment and make other things go away. But anyway, I'll shut up.
It's a very small piece of history that Bucklin Brook has not been here, or not been seen. I mean, thousands of years it was here, an important part of the landscape. We're only talking 80 years, which to us is a lifetime, but in history, it's a little tiny flash of time. And then this city, Pawtucket, decided that this brook that's been here for thousands of years was in the way of this. And talking briefly about revitalization, we were just at McCoy Stadium. If I could take you north of there, through the 10-mile watershed into the Neponset watershed. There used to be this football team up there called the New England Patriots. They existed until last year when Tom Brady left. But they played at the old Foxborough Stadium. And then in the early 2000s, they built a new stadium, Gillette Stadium. And when they did, they uncovered, they daylighted is the term they used. They daylighted part of the Great Neponset River, which is one of the rivers that flows into Boston.
Quincy.
Yeah, Quincy, yeah, the Boston area. That's not Boston? Okay.
That's Boston.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm a Rhode Islander.
Yeah.
So did they leave it uncovered?
They daylighted it. It's back. They
daylighted it,
dug it up. They took it out of its culvert. It's a small section. The river's not big there. But it's there again for the first time in a long time. And if you take the train up to Gillette Stadium, I was only kidding about the Patriots. I know they're still there. But if you take the train up to Gillette Stadium to watch the Patriots or any other reason, you walk along the Neponset River. And that's a stretch of river that hadn't seen the light of day for many decades. But there it was. You go down to Providence, the Great Salt Cove, the Wanasquatucket River, the Moshassuck River, the head of the Providence River. They put that under the city for development. And then, just like we have now, that development ran its course. Its lifetime ended. It became urban decay. They uncovered those three rivers. And it's a big draw for the city. You have the walkways along the rivers, the paddling, all the things, Water Place Park. It's a draw. The rivers are a big thing in Providence. If we go over to Massachusetts, city of Fall River. Fall River has that name for a reason. Because the Quequechan River, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, dropped a great distance from the top of the hill that you see as you're coming on 195. It dropped in a series of falls down into Battleship Cove, where Mount Hope Bay meets the Taunton River. They put that underground, and now there's a huge outcry in Fall River. We need to daylight these falls, the namesake of the city, which has been hidden for decades, buried by 195 coming through, by development. The mindset of the time when Bucklin Brook was buried has changed. And the stadium has served its purpose. We have to say goodbye to it. The team is gone. We need to look at ways this can be done. How do we... Bucklin Brook will never flow in its entirety. Again, at least not in our lifetime. You know, maybe when the human race disappears, nature will come back, but we need to see. It seems like a long shot, but is there something we can do to see small portions of the stream again? They're going to develop that for something at some point, and we would not be doing our jobs. You guys get up at 8 o'clock on a Saturday morning to look for this brook that we can't even see. We wouldn't be doing our jobs if we weren't there speaking for it, saying, you know, the draw is actually not the stadium. The draw is what was there before the stadium. How can we use that to help this city? It's the natural features that will boost the city, that will boost everything, make people want to come here. You know, the bike path on the 10 Mile River that was created in the early 2000s. How many people has that brought to the river? When we were kids, we would go back there. And there would be, I remember seeing soda machines dumped back there. You'd go down by the trestle, soda machines, toilets, sinks, everything. Everything you could think of, they would throw in there. And Don was there with the 10 Mile River Watershed Alliance trying to keep up with it. But it was the natural river, the river. People wanted to see it. People came back. Along the Blackstone River. When I was a kid, most of us were kids even, you know, my grandmother always spoke so poorly of the Blackstone River because in her generation, there were cars in there. There was everything in there. You couldn't touch that water. But look at how that's brought people. You know, so the mindset from 80 years ago has disappeared. We don't want pavement. We don't want buildings. The industry along Delta Drive, north of McCoy Stadium, it's all leaving. You have all these empty factory buildings. You know, we need to say, hey, there's a natural feature under there that's just dying to be let free from this culvert. And there are people now. A year ago, nobody knew what Bucklin Brook was. Nobody knew what Bucklin Brook was. And now here we are, following this course. You know? It was just a brief mention. Yeah, there was a buried brook somewhere over there. Now, we know its course. We know its 4-mile course from Sweden Swamp to the Seekonk River of Narragansett Bay. So much has been accomplished already. And this natural world is really on people's minds now. You know, the Friends of the 10 Mile and Bucklin Brook Facebook page has almost 2,300 people that are on it, seeing it, following this. We had a lot of people when we were just Friends of the 10 Mile. When we became Friends of the 10 Mile and Bucklin Brook, that grew. So now we have these two watersheds and we have interest in both. We have people that live in both watersheds. You know, like Don, Nancy, me, a lot of us are residents of the 10 Mile River watershed. You have the McDuffs, they're residents of the Bucklin Brook watershed. And we didn't know for a long time where the line was. Where was it separated? Because it is so hand in hand with each other. And it really could, you know, a small park around here with a flowing brook, I think would do this area pretty good. Somebody who not aware of the whole Bucklin Brook story, it might be very strange to have a street called Lakeview Avenue where there is no lake. Keep your eyes out as you go around. Look for stuff like that. That might be telling you something. Different house dates back to the 1600s.
Yeah.
That's been altered, but the original chimney,
Yep.
right in the center,
Right in the center.
right smack in the middle here.
Yep.
This was one of the Bucklin families. Their son took the house after them, and I forget the son's name, but he was named after the brook, of the brook, is what they called it, because the house was on the brook.
That's
There's the
nice.
crossing of the brook right there. Yep. So that's a big piece of history there. That's very hard to spot in this, you know. That's it. That's an old house. Brook watershed. There's the horse to finish us off.
The same one. I think it's the same one that was over with.
Look
at that.
More to say about this, I think you've all got pretty good. I think next week is it going to be a different type of session in that we talk about the absence of the wetlands associated with the brook, the floodplain. You know, we're talking about a brook that's been buried, and all the wetlands associated with it have disappeared. They've been filled, they've been altered. So you're talking 7 or 8 square miles of land surface. It's a watershed. Got to remember, it's still a watershed. So that when it rains, when we get heavy rain, and the rain runs off the landscape to the low points, now it runs into culverts. There are no wetlands to act as blotters. Wetlands act as blotters to make the release of water off the landscape slower. There's a slower release. With Bucklin Brook, they mucked up things so bad and eliminated the blotters that when it rains and we get heavy rain, it's like one of those flash floods out west that come down a dry arroyo. This water runs off the 7 to 8 miles of landscape, off of parking lots and streets, runs into these storm drains. You're going to see the end where the water comes out next week, where it comes out directly into Narragansett Bay. And when that storm water comes out down that sluice, they've turned it into a concrete sluice. When that flood water comes out of those storm drains, it's really a flash flood. And there's no filtration system. All the detritus, all the rubbish, all the garbage, everything that washes through the storm drain system comes out in one place, Narragansett Bay. And so much crap comes out of there that at low tide, there's actually a delta out there. And after a storm at low tide, hundreds and hundreds of seabirds will come and land on the delta and eat the crap that's washing down this brook. So you get to see that spot next week. That's the next part of our session 3. Where's Bucklin Brook? And we'll show you. It goes directly to Narragansett Bay. And you know they're trying to save Narragansett. We do know they're trying to save Narragansett Bay. This brook in its current state does not do that bay any good. But they're trying to catch the excess water below subterranean. They're going to start a big engineering project down there, underground, like they did in Providence, to catch the storm water so that they can treat it slowly and get it to the bay treated. I'm ahead of myself, but we're going to see all. That's the preview. We're going to touch on that next week. We're going to look at another substantial pond associated with Bucklin Brook that's been totally filled in and converted to a playground. You'll see it all next week. This is the coming attraction. So I'll be quiet.
Of the 3 walks,
come back next week.
part 3 is the one I look forward to the most because
Come back.
we have a couple surprises next week. And question: where is Bucklin Brook? I think you guys get a better idea of where Bucklin Brook is. You think so? Got a little bit more evidence today. So we saw it flowing today, and this time next week you'll have your answer. Where's Bucklin Brook? I just thought it was pretty dark.
You can hear it for sure.
Oh, I see it's flowing. See it? Yeah, it's flowing good still.
Oh yeah, listen to it.